Vladimir Putin seems to be running short on allied countries. Why are even some of his most loyal satellite states now slipping from his grip? But is help coming from an unlikely source? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about this crazy story. So this is one of those slow boil stories that I think is still really important. And I want to talk about two countries. The first is Serbia. Now, Serbia has been rocked with protests for over the last 6 months, demanding the resignation of their longtime prime minister. I'm so sorry to my Serbian viewers, Vucic. And Alexander Vucic has been Serbian president for the last 12 years and is generally considered a quasi-authoritarian or quasi-autocrat, right? Like Vladimir Putin, he wins elections, but he makes sure that the government keeps his finger on the scale, biasing those elections in his favor. And so the problem is when you have these kinds of autocratic systems, Viktor Orban in Hungary is another good example. It requires actually a lot of corruption. It requires a lot of payoffs, right? Because anybody else who could stage a meaningful opposition to him, say a Serbian billionaire, needs to make sure that he is on the take. So Serbian businesses make sure that government contracts are always friendly, never get a little too in the weeds about things like safety regulations or using right materials. And this is something that a lot of the Serbian public has for a time looked the other way. But now things have gotten a little out of control. And what really sparked this is actually a pretty innocuous event. This was a collapse of a overhang that killed a number of students, right? So what happened is that in November, there was a collapse of a railway station, and this resulted in a crushing death of almost a dozen people. But this is literally like in the heart of the city. So it would be the equivalent of a newly rebuilt Times Square collapsing and killing a dozen people. And the problem is not just that this was collapsed, but that the president himself showed up to sign off on the effort, right? And because the president literally cut the ribbon at the building. So he literally said, this is something that I have personally overseen, personally approved. Now, here's what's insane. First off, early, there were some quiet vigils honoring the victims of the collapse. But what happened is that the Serbian government couldn't have responded worse to this situation. So instead of the Serbian president going, we will find who did this, we are going to figure out what happened. I'm as upset as you guys are, and we are going to get to the bottom of it. Instead, he and the pro-government news outlets, so the Serbian equivalent of, say, Fox News, initially claimed that the canopy had never been reconstructed at all, that there had never been a reconstruction project, that the president had never attended the project because it had never happened. That is an insane take. Again, imagine rebuilding like Union Station and cutting the ribbon and then having it collapse and then going, guys, Union Station always looked like that. Okay, that's how unhinged and how cringe this level of denial is. But literally, there were still news articles and even videos showing the reconstruction online, and including showing him actually opening the reconstructed railway station. And so this sort of unhinged take absolutely enraged the demonstrators, turning what was a peaceful vigil into a showdown over reality itself, right? And this is the culmination of, again, a huge amount of corruption. And what you see is that the Serbian government keeps doubling and tripling down on the protesters' frustrations. For example, after saying, hey, no, you definitely did rebuild that, and you should have an independent authority conduct some kind of investigation to figure out, this is one of the things as students, the goals are what they say is justice for the victims of the railway station collapse, i.e. an accountability if there was government negligence, and a resignation of the prime minister who signed off on this, or president, right? Dismissal. But the thing is, initially, the politicians and the the Serbian party that backs the president literally had the dumbest takes. He said, this is from one of the senior officials within the president's party. He said, quote, "We will fight against these anarcho-terrorists, fake commie intellectuals, and the pseudo-elite that is ravaging Serbia with anti-Serbian attitudes." Guys, imagine how fucking brilliant you have to be to have, say, protesters who go, "Hey, I think it's bad that those kids died in that railway station collapse," to go, do you hate Serbia? They go, "It's Serbians that died, my guy. Like, you killed a bunch of Serbians and we're mad about it." And you're like, do you hate Serbia? Like, no. This is why you're just quintupling down on the cringe, right? They call them, "It's time to stop this social scum," he adds. "In every place and every step," the opposition leader continues. "First of all, in every discussion, if necessary, with force. This scum will no longer be able to terrorize the country. Long live Serbia." This is pretty unhinged, honestly. And I can't imagine why these protesters are increasingly irked. But again, you see it in large numbers of college campuses, but now it's spread to even more areas. With up to 20,000 protesters downtown, but hundreds of thousands across the country. There's also been a widespread tactic of blockades in which areas are sort of blocked off and in 24-hour runs. There's also been more mobilization. For example, farmers blocked the Ibar highway with tractors. You have, let's see. Oh, you also have the prime minister doubling down, saying, quote, "You can't bring down a country because of 15 people who died, nor 155, nor 1,555. That, FYI, guys, that's not a hot take to be like, actually, guys, I can kill anyone I want is really not the way to deal with this. So you can imagine. Oh, here's another brilliant one. Commenting on the involvement of high school students in the protests, another high-ranking official said, quote, "Children are property of the state until they reach the age of majority." So then doubling down and saying, actually, guys, we own your children. Again, if you know anything about being a parent, you know that if someone from the state comes and says, "We're taking your children away," even a pretty sane, grounded parent is going to go, "I will carve you into pieces and feed you to your own dogs before you do that." So you can understand how this hot take fell pretty flat. So this is escalated, including, and more sectors are rising up essentially against the Serbian government. Education workers. You have unions. You have the entire bar of Serbian, the Bar Association of Serbia went on strike. So this is just ramping up. And what's happened is that Vladimir Putin has gone over to the next logical step of the playbook and has begun to say, actually, guys, these protests are they're actually sponsored by foreign governments. Notice that they weren't sponsored by foreign governments. They agreed totally that they were absolutely organic Serbian protests right up until they grew to a point that they began to meaningfully threaten the government. And then all of a sudden they go, actually, guys, we're sure this time. We have evidence that we didn't show you before and we didn't ever mention or discuss, but we're definitely convinced that now those 100,000 people that showed up in downtown Serbia were actually foreign agitators, okay? Dude, FYI, the U.S. government can't get 100,000 of its own citizens to show up to a rally, okay? There's no fucking chance that any foreign intelligence service can just conjure up, 100,000 people in Serbia, which is literally that's like 1 in 4 Serbians. It's some tremendously huge number, okay? Or 4 in every 100 Serbians. It's something preposterous like that. So Vladimir Putin, of course, is now saying, guys, Dmitry Peskov saying, quote, "We, the Russians, cannot rule out the use of familiar tactics aimed at carrying out color revolutions in Serbia." FYI, guys, this is the weakest take of all time. We cannot rule out that this was color revolutions is sort of like saying, technically, we can't rule out that your cold could be caused by a your routine cold, it could be, an ultra super rare cancer of the nose, but it's probably allergies or just a regular seasonal flu, right? So just because we can't rule it out means we have no evidence for it, but we can't prove the opposite. But of course, that's sort of the definition of clandestine work. You can't prove, for example, you can't rule out that any given influencer, including me, I could be a CIA agent. Maybe I'm a Kremlin double agent. You can't rule it out because, well, how could you? So this is just pure bullshit from Dmitry Peskov. But what it really says is that they view this as a real meaningful threat. He continues, we hope Western countries, which often interfere in other nations to promote their interests, will refrain from pushing color revolutions this time, right? This is, again, from Sergei Lavrov telling TASS. Remember, guys, that the Russians maintain that any time there is a popular movement against a Russian-aligned autocrat, they say that is a function solely of the Western intelligence agencies. It's literally not possible that the average Serbian, I don't know, doesn't love a massively corrupt government that's in line with a dictator. How could you not love Vladimir Putin with his progressive policies and his willingness to kill opposition leaders? So this is, I think, a sign that these protests are not diminishing, they are escalating. And that a key Russian ally in Serbia, it appears to be just about ready to depart from the Serbian or the Russian sphere of influence if there is indeed a snap election against the government. But I wanted to also talk about, well, making Vladimir Putin seethe, because frankly, it just feels good. But before we talk about that, I wanted to mention that you guys may know I have a literal 1-week-old baby at home and a toddler. It is a little intense. Yeah, I've still put out 7 videos a week, and I just yesterday ran a triathlon. Not well. I cannot say that I was well trained for this, but I did do it, and I was able to do it because I have a wife who is very good at multitasking and very understanding, and of course because I had lots of caffeine throughout it. If you follow me on Instagram, you know that according to my Garmin watch, I got 4 hours of sleep when I ran that triathlon, a sleep score of 45 out of 100. So yeah, you can imagine that I needed a portable energy solution that went where I went. That is where Strike Gum came in, guys. Literally 0 sugar, an energy drink's worth of caffeine. I had this on the bike, on the run, and when I needed a little bit of extra pop just to lock in and get it done, I chewed a Strike Gum, right? So if you are interested, and you don't have to be an overachieving triathlete like me, overachieving, underperforming triathlete like me, but literally, it's a favorite of cops, firefighters. I even got messages from Ukrainian drone pilots who say, listen, when we have to do these long reconnaissance missions, I can't be juggling my drone and sipping an energy drink, but chewing this gum gives me the surge and focus that I need to lock in. So go to strikegum.com, right? Obviously, you'd be crazy if you're already one of the 70% of our customers who reorder, right? That's 7 out of 10 people who try one piece of Strike Gum come back. If you're one of those people, don't rip yourselves off. Get the subscribe and save, okay? Right? You get it every month. Boom, we give you a discount, right? Why would you rip yourself off? You can just cancel anytime. Also, FYI, if you have purchased it on strikegum.com and you've enjoyed it, man, drop us a review. We appreciate that, right? It would be really helpful. Only ones on Strike Gum. Okay, Amazon got mad at me for having too many reviews too fast. But strikegum.com, yeah, we'd be happy to have more reviews. Okay. So one of the questions people have is, how do you know Vladimir Putin's so mad about all this? Well, the answer is he is extra mad about the level of Western support, right? We see here that despite all these signs that the Russian position, the Russian economy is weakening and the Russian political position is weakening, because bear in mind, guys, right, Serbia might potentially exit the Russian sphere of influence, and we're going to talk about even another country exiting the Western sphere of influence, but there's a huge problem. Iran is another pro-Russian country that has recently had its influence cut off at the knees, right? The U.S. military has smoked Houthi militants who are proxies for the Iranian military. The Israelis have basically crippled Hezbollah. They've crippled Hamas in Gaza. right? And struck numerous Iranian military targets, as has the United States, taking out the Iranian nuclear program. And remember, it's not theoretical. The Russian military has provided basically all of the air defense equipment for Iran, hell of a lot of good that did, and has also provided the Shahed drones that are used by Russia to strike Ukraine. So these guys have a years-long military exchange relationship, and the Kremlin has, again, the Iranians have never probably been in a poorer international position in terms of their ability to project power. So, of course, whenever you have someone who's a raging narcissist like Putin start to diminish their standing, what they do is go back to the only bag of tricks they know works, which is seething, raging, and coping. And as you can see, he's now in full seethe mode, saying, actually, guys, if you want a ceasefire, you can't even train Ukrainian soldiers. Ukrainian soldiers have to pinky promise not to learn anything from Western allies, right? Remember, Russia also has at different times said that Ukraine has to actually turn over all of its Western equipment to Russia, but now it actually needs to mind wipe all of its soldiers of any Western training. So this is increasingly preposterous and is obviously unbelievably unrealistic. Now, obviously, there's a lot to criticize about these training programs. But literally, you're talking about an insane number of people. You have obviously the German military training these troops at a almost industrial scale. The UK, the United States, even Cambodia has supported training. F-16 pilots and technicians trained in US, Romania, Denmark, France, Belgium, Netherlands, and Poland. Tens of thousands of troops in the UK. So this is, and you can also see this involves instructors from Australia, Denmark, Canada, Lithuania, New Zealand, Norway, Finland, and Sweden. Absolutely preposterous for the Russians to make this demand, especially given that they have never been in a weaker position. But I think this is the sort of seething that you see whenever something bad happens to Vladimir Putin. And if you're like me, you cheer every time something bad happens to Vladimir Putin. And I know you guys are like me because you've stepped up, and boy, the Russian trolls in the comment section just get angrier and angrier the higher this number goes. You guys know that when the Ukrainian units really have a pressing need, a dire need, and Russian fiber optic drones, that is a dire need. They reach out to us, right? There's a lot of influencers they work with, some of which are actually bigger than the Combat Vet Reacts community, but there's nobody that mobilizes more than us. And that's why they have this very ambitious goal that we are blowing out of the water. We've only been operating for a week or two, and we're already at 65 grand, almost a third of the way there. But what is it for? It is to help Ukrainian units stop Russian fiber optic drones. We're getting them their own long-range reconnaissance fiber optic drones to find Russian drone teams, to improve their mobility, to get to and from positions faster where they're less likely to get spotted, and of course, lots and lots of nets. These drones, as you can literally see from the picture, get caught in nets that they put over main supply routes to protect them, forming a canopy that the drones cannot fly through. So if you're interested in helping these guys out, of course, 59th has pledged some of their patches to donors that donate up to $250. $400 gets you not just the 59th patch, but actually I think this is pretty sick and I've never seen it before. The Ukrainian Sun patch. This is the flag of the Free Donetsk Oblast. Again, the Russian-occupied Donetsk Oblast has a totally different flag. So thanks again to all you guys like Ian Knutson. Canada stands with Ukraine in your fight against the invaders. Jerome, right, just dropping $260 and walking away in silence. A real gangster move there. Brian Langford. Amador from Galicia, Spain. And, of course, Oliver Kalmed, Salve Ukraini. Alejandro Virtuoso Heraldon. Dope. I dropping 200 kroner. I have no idea what that is, right? So thanks to all you guys that do your part. Even guys like Tom, a small donor from Norway. Hey, Tom said, listen, I'll make coffee at home, and I will take that money I would have given to Starbucks, and we'll get some more nets over Ukrainian positions. These guys, I can tell you for sure, every $100 we raise allows Ukrainian soldiers to come home. So thank you guys, as always. Okay. But there's another Russian ally who appears to be rethinking their support of Russia, and that is Azerbaijan. What? But Paul, I thought Azerbaijan was a staunch Russian ally. What happened? Well, the answer is the Russians have been increasingly, as often happens with authoritarian governments, is when you are an authoritarian, you only have two tools in your toolkit to keep people supporting you. You have money that you pay, usually to a country's elites, right? Or you have the stick, which is using your special services and your other coercive methods, your military if necessary, to keep that country from getting a little big for its britches. Well, there's a problem in that Vladimir Putin has, and that is that his country is going broke. So he doesn't really have the money to bribe Azeri politicians, to bribe Azeri businessmen, right? To give them sweet contracts or give them a cut of Russian-backed enterprises. And the problem is he doesn't have the military might or even these special services anymore to coerce people. And so more and more you are seeing when they do try to use this force, right? The only tool that they still have in their toolkit, the Azeris are increasingly saying, hey, go shove it up your ass. You can see here that in Baku, Azerbaijan, all Russian cultural events, both official and even private events, have been canceled, right? And this cancellation came after a police raid in Russian territory killed two Azeris. They are literally 60 years old, detained along with many others over a cold murder case in 2002. But this incident prompted Baku's Ministry of Culture to issue a statement saying, quote, targeted and extrajudicial killings and acts of violence committed by Russian law enforcement agencies against Azerbaijanis. And it describes this as actually a systematic effort. So this should tell you that an extremely cold case from literally 25 years ago, resulting in the death of two 60-year-old dudes, probably, as the Azerbaijanis point out, that this is actually just about killing people that are seen as problems for Russia. And Russia has absolutely demonstrated a willingness to kill nationals from other countries. And this would be an act of war if it was done by any other country. And certainly if it was done to Russia, they would describe it as an act of war, particularly when they add that it is a systematic killing of Azeris in Russia. Now, the diplomatic fallout, of course, this is just the latest in a series of real problems. Remember that aircraft that was shot down last year in Azerbaijan, right? It was an Azerbaijani jet shot down soon after departing Grozny. But we talked about the fact that it was a really strange story, as the aircraft was actually attacked after it was leaving Russian airspace. So it wasn't even a case of a tragic accident. There was some kind of hostile act by the Russian government targeting this aircraft after it was on its way out of Russian airspace. It was actually over a body of water between the two airspaces. So this reflects, again, the fact that not so much, remember, if the leading politicians in Azerbaijan want to stay aligned with Russia, they would sweep this under the rug like they sweep everything else. But the fact is that the Azerbaijanis have an incentive to do two things. One is to remind Russia and to engage in basically rent seeking, to remind Russia to say, listen, Vladimir, we are your friends, but our friendship comes with a price, because countries don't have friends the way you and I do, right? Countries have interests. And Azerbaijan, it goes, listen, our ruling class, you better not think about paying us less. We demand the same bribes or even more, because being your friend is hard. There's a lot of sanctions. There's a lot of pressure. And a lot of your other friends have been killed lately, right? Look at the Assad regime in Syria, collapsed. The Iranian regime, neutered. The Serbians on the brink of government collapse. And so the Azerbaijanis may be saying, if you don't want this to happen to us, Vladimir, you better start writing some bigger checks, because we are putting our butts on the line for you. And it's dangerous. It's a dangerous business to be your friend. Or the Azerbaijanis may literally be saying, I think you need to find some new friends. And that is something that definitely keeps Vladimir Putin up at night. But don't worry, he's got help in the form of the United States. That's right, guys. One of Russia's best diplomatic coups, for lack of a better term, is energy diplomacy, or if you really want to think about it, energy blackmail. You see, Rosatom and Gazprom, two Russian state-controlled entities, are famous for going into countries where Russia wants to exert influence and saying, listen, we're going to build you guys a brand spanking new power plant on the cheap. It's going to produce really cheap electricity. Gazprom is going to own it, so you're going to get the cheapest possible rates for your fossil fuels or your nuclear fuel. And, you know, it'll be just and we'll make a little money. There's no strings attached. Fun fact with Vladimir Putin, there's always strings attached. And the reason... And what they did this in Moldova, very simply, right? They got their hands on those key power plants. And then when, for example, the Moldovan government would do things that the Russians didn't like, get a little bit independent, get a little bit Western for Vladimir Putin's taste, he would go and say, oh, your power plant. Oh, by the way, guys, costs have increased. Your electricity prices for your citizens is now now increased by fourfold. And the Moldovan government then has to go, okay, great, we can choose between our political freedom of orienting towards the West or negotiating against Vladimir Putin, right? Or simply it's not even about even West and East. It's about competing, saying, hey, who's going to pay us the most for mineral rights, for a trade deal? Who's going to be the most productive person to have a visa program with? Anything, right? They can have political independence or their people can starve, right? So that's his MO. And so the fact is that the U.S. has said, listen, you have shown systematically, Vladimir Putin, that you are prone to these kind of game playings. So we are sanctioning any entity that builds one of your power plants. It's also worth noting that the U.S. also engages in some level of power plant diplomacy, but not anything like this. Instead, what we do is basically try to put our finger on the other side of the scale. So famously, USAID went to Moldova and said, hey, we're the richest country on earth. Our economy is literally 10 to 15 times the size of Russia's. So while Russia has to build these power plants and then they own them and then they play these energy games, they say, listen, you want to know how good free trade is? You want to know how good it is to be in the West? We have so much money, we'll just gift you a power plant. USAID came in and said, Moldova, here's the money. Build yourselves a new power plant. And they said, well, are we going to have to buy coal from you guys? They go, no. Don't worry about it. And Vladimir Putin, of course, heard that and more seething and coping. But the fact is that the U.S. went from saying, no, we'll build you a better power plant so that you can't get coerced by Vladimir Putin, right? Instead, now they're saying, yeah, go get leverage over our ally Hungary. U.S. has lifted sanctions on Hungary's Pact 2 nuclear power plant project, which is, of course, brought to you by Russia's by state-owned energy consortium, Rosatom. That's right. They said these politically motivated measures, i.e. the sanctions, were imposed by the Biden administration just before Trump took office. Bear in mind, Trump has kept every single one of those sanctions in place. He says, grateful to the Trump administration as this project will guarantee our future energy supply. He forgot to add, will be controlled by Russia. Our future energy supply is not guaranteed. It is guaranteed only as long as Russia wants you to have it, right? Of course, these power plants were originally built using Soviet-era design. In 2014, Rosatom signed a deal with the firm to construct 2 new reactors, and the project, of course, managed by Russia. So, again, while Vladimir Putin losing allies in some parts of the world, he seems to be strengthening his leverage over others, particularly Hungary's Viktor Orban. Anyway, guys, hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much to all of our members, guys like Peter Fucci, Dan M. Petchtoro, Henry Rusciarata, Sky Call, Chris Rossi, AL90, Sergei Zinchenko, D. Stewart, James Porsche, B. Hemmerling, all of our Lieutenant tier members. Hit that subscribe button. I appreciate you guys so much. All you guys that have stepped up over on Combat Vet News, bought your strike gum, left us reviews, and, of course, donated to the Ukrainians. They appreciate it. We appreciate it. Catch you later.